In Basement Bodybuilding's video yesterday, he asked some almost philosophical questions about the bench press, like why it enjoys this unique special status as kind of the king of lifts, the peak test of upper body strength. And he looked at it more from the lens of, what is it about the characteristics of this specific exercise that makes it so special? And he made some good points. It is a good exercise, and that's a big part of the reason why it has the status that it has and why it's stuck around for so long. But I think a lot of why it has this status is more to do with its time in history, kind of being at the right place at the right time. So I wanted to give my opinion on why the bench press ended up with this special status that it has. Now, obviously, this is just going to be my opinion, but it's based pretty heavily on a knowledge of history. So I'll go ahead and make that case because it's not just useful for the bench press. I think it gives a lot of insight into cycles that just tend to keep happening throughout physical culture that we kind of need to be aware of. Before I get into it, Baseman and I don't know if I should call him Baseman. I don't know if we're on first name basis. Maybe I should call him Mr. Bodybuilding to be a little bit more formal. Mr. Bodybuilding and I are both sponsored by Barbell Apparel, so I want to quickly plug them, especially now. I got my Instagram account banned. I still don't know why, briefly last week, but they were very supportive of me. They weren't like, oh God, you got your Instagram canceled. We're going to fire you. They were super supportive. So I'm very appreciative of them. And not only that, they make great clothes. Usually I plug the jeans, but this week I want to plug the Adapt shorts. These are fantastic. I jogged like a quarter mile with like everything that my family had forgotten in my pockets, wearing a carrier. You'd be like water cups, sunscreen, all sorts of crazy stuff in the zipper pockets. Work perfectly to jog down the beach. They're not falling down. They're plenty of space, and they still look very sleek, streamlined. Awesome shorts. So anyway, go get something from Barbell Apparel. Fantastic sponsor. I'm really appreciative of them. All right, so the reason that I think the bench press enjoys its special position in lifting culture has more to do, in my opinion, with history than any characteristics of the lift itself. Now, it's a good lift. There's nothing wrong with it. I like the bench press. I definitely give it to most of my clients who are interested in growing their chest. It's a good lift, but it's not that special. See, what's always happened throughout history is there's a ruination treadmill with exercises. So if an exercise is cool, it's good for development, but it also looks cool, well, people are going to want to compete in it, see who's the best at it. And inevitably they start cheating, and then it starts warping away from what it used to be that made it great, right? The first example here is, of course, the strict press, right? Obviously, this used to be the king of the lifts before bench press, right? Back before anyone had benches, you just picked the barbell up and strictly press it overhead, right? That was all well and good. Wonderful shoulder developer, tricep developer, but then inevitably as you compete in it, people start leaning back more, and then you get the Russians getting to the point where they can do basically a jerk using body bend without bending the knees, although sometimes they do that too when they thought no one was looking.
Hit the clean. Got it.
You got to be a little bit careful with these Russians. But anyway, they completely warped it away from what it used to be. Now, still, a good test of athletic ability, right? But it's definitely not your strict press anymore, and that ended up getting the strict press banned from the Olympics, right? I'll give you a more recent example, right? Everybody loves weighted dips, right? It's a wonderful exercise. Maybe we should compete at that instead of the bench press, right? Well, they started doing that very recently with what's called street lifting, basically weighted calisthenics. And look at this. I'm going to put up a video on screen. They already ruined it. It's like the sport is super recent, and this already looks nothing like what anyone thinks a weighted dip actually should be. Again, no hate to the young lady up here, very strong, but we've already ruined it. Like whatever we start competing in, we already ruined. So why did the bench press come about? Well, because of another lift that was ruined, right? Initially people would just do floor presses, but back before they thought of doing it on a bench, right? You just, press the barbell from the floor. That was how you did your horizontal pressing, right? Um, and that was all well and good. At first, I think people were mostly doing it lying back on the floor. Then people started arching, which I actually like. I think the arch floor press is a great exercise. It's a lot like decline bench, except you don't take your head off and die if you, can I say that on YouTube? Whatever. You don't, your head does not come off of your body if you fail a lift. You can just put it down safely. So it's honestly like a just an upgrade on decline bench just because it's pretty much the same thing, but safer and less equipment. You don't have to, try to set up the safeties and a power rack, and it's a pain. I like decline bench, but it's just so much easier to do the arch floor press, right? But anyway, it got to the point where, now people are doing like full on contortionist back bends. You had a guy called Bill Lilly who was very small, who managed to basically just do, kind of like using almost his body almost the entire way, just like by arching so much, he was able to kind of like belly press 500 pounds. This was like in the, I think the 20s, right? And everyone just kind of agreed, okay, this is ridiculous, right? Like this is no longer, we're no longer, testing our upper body strength. We're just getting into some weird contortionist speed, which is cool. It's cool that people can do that, but it's not the thing that we started with, right? We need to fix this, right? So that's when the bench press started to gain popularity. Okay, let's get rid of all this arching nonsense. Let's just lie on a bench to make it easier, and then we have some more room to travel with our elbows, and cool, that'll be our test of upper body strength. And remember, at the same time, the strict press has also been completely distorted away from just a test of pure upper body strength. So that's actually where powerlifting came from. It arose out of, kind of some dissatisfaction with the main competitive lifts of the day, especially the Olympic lifts, where people wanted just to get back to just a test of raw strength, not all this skill and, contortions and whatnot. Let's just do pure raw strength, right? So that's where powerlifting came from. The original powerlifting competitions were called odd lift competitions because they were they were not the standardized competitive lifts. It was actually called odd lift competition, right? And it wasn't always, bench press, squat, and deadlift at that time, but those pretty quickly became the standard, right? And, by the 50s, powerlifting was a thing, and we had, obviously bench press is one of those main feats. So how did it gain the status that it has now without falling victim to the same issues that every other competitive lift has? Well, it eventually did. We'll get to that. All right. So right after powerlifting became a thing and started to gain popularity, that's when we had a couple of things happen. First, we had the rise of steroids. So, powerlifting became a thing, I think mostly in the 50s, right? And then, 58, you get steroids, right? So one thing that did that was, I think, positive really for the bench press and really the power lifts in general is now it relieves some of that competitive pressure that people always have to want to try to find ways to game the system and just like lift a little bit more in every lift. And now you have a much bigger ceiling to get up to in terms of how much we can progress this exercise, right? You have some guys naturally in the 50s getting up to like 500 pounds. Okay, that's cool. But, now we have Diana Ball, so now, we can get to the point where even, a lot of bodybuilders who aren't powerlifting specialists are doing 500 pounds, and the powerlifters can do even more, right? So that gave them a lot more window to just play with, adding muscle mass and strength using steroids instead of having to mess with the technique. So the basic bench press technique kind of stayed, what it had always been, and it wasn't immediately distorted in the way that, say, the weighted dip has been recently, right? And then on top of that, as we move through like kind of into the 80s and 90s, the powerlifters, now again, everybody cheats. Everybody always wants to cheat, but they took a unique direction in their cheating in this case that, we haven't seen in too many other strength sports. A little bit strongman, but mostly, this is a unique direction. They decided to cheat instead of by messing around with a lift to make it something completely different. They just messed around with their clothing. They started wearing first like ultra like with too many t-shirts, like starched, all this stuff, like, all sorts of crazy stuff. They were hiding tennis balls in their knee sleeves. They were doing all sorts of stuff, but they were just cheating with the equipment and not with the lifts, right? So, the standard bench press technique, I mean, obviously, the shirts eventually became a thing. Now we have like bulletproof bench press shirts, and it's gotten to the point where it's obviously silly, right? Where the heaviest power lift in history is a bench press. Like, anyone who knows human anatomy is going to say, wait a second, the heaviest bench press is heavier than the heaviest deadlift and the heaviest squat. What are we doing, guys? Right? So it was silly, right? It got absolutely silly with the bench shirts and the equipment, but underneath, they weren't messing around with the actual bench press technique that much, right? Um, and so, like, the bench press that just your regular guy in the gym did was not changing in a crazy way. The bodybuilders were still using it because it was an effective exercise, and they weren't really messing with it too much because it worked, right? So we didn't really see the bench press actually get messed with to the degree that it had until it got to the point where, equipped powerlifting was so obviously ridiculous that now we have the raw powerlifting movement, and now, we're going to do away with all that, get back to the basics, what actually makes sense. And that was cool. That was a cool thing. But eventually after that, okay, well, how are we going to cheat now? That's when all the crazy sumo stuff and then the like insanely arch, like no ROM benching became a thing. So my contention here is that based on, just because of the invention of steroids and then the crazy bench shirts and all, it kept people from messing with the actual bench press technique for just a lot longer than you usually see with competitive exercises, right? So in that time, it had time to really become just this, massive generational tradition where like just, your granddad did it, your dad did it, generations of lifters have, seen this bench as this, really foundational, important thing. Um, and no one really questioned it until recently when the raw powerlifters did finally start really messing with it a whole lot. So at that point, it's already got this status as this this huge thing. So I think that's where it got its status from. I think that's kind of how it was able to become like the king. And obviously, okay, the other power lifts, that didn't really work as well for the other power lifts. You've had like depth cheating, obviously, on the squat, but then I think also just the fact that it's upper body. Everybody cares more about upper body strength. No, nobody cares what you sumo deadlift. Everybody, we see our pecs in the mirror. We like that. And we just care how much a man up how much upper body strength the guy has. It is just sorry. It is kind of more of a. It's seen as more masculine. That's just how we all see it. We look at our pecs in the mirror. We don't care. I don't care what my legs look like. Let's be real, right? I mean, frankly, I don't care nearly as much what I squat as what I bench press, right? So I think that's how bench got to be where it is. Now, I'm not saying it's not a good lift. I'm not saying the stability isn't a factor. I mean, it's very progressible. It's stable. It works great. I think it's a fantastic exercise. But what I also think is that there are plenty of other exercises that deserve that pedestal. Like, for example, the strict press that we talked about. The strict press, I think, is equally deserving. It's not as stable, but I think that's a good thing. I think a little lean back actually helps you grind out reps and makes it a more effective exercise. Just let's not get into doing kind of a like bent backwards, like upper body jerk. That's obviously, I mean, it's still impressive, but maybe that's not the best developmental exercise, right? But the strict press, if we don't mess with it too much, it deserves every bit as much status as the bench press does. Even the weighted dip that we talked about. I mean, there are a ton of good exercises. The arch floor press that I talked about. I mean, I'm not going to say it's better than bench press, but it's great. I mean, it's a very good developmental exercise. And there are a lot of these, right? So that brings me to the actual main point of Basement's video, which was people kind of trying to sell like these new secrets or whatever to kind of raise people's ceiling more so. Like the big channels are all selling that they're going to raise the ceiling of your potential with these like advanced techniques and whatnot, instead of just kind of raising the basic floor of confidence. Well, here's the thing. With my channel, I am definitely trying to raise the ceiling or raise the roof, as they would say back in the 90s. I don't know if you kids these days would probably remember that. But anyway, I'm actually trying to raise the roof, so to speak. I think there's plenty of channels that are giving good basic information for beginners. I am trying to show a little bit more esoteric things that can help you raise your ceiling. The difference is I can actually deliver on that. I'm not giving you some nonsense split that is supposedly more scientifically optimal. I'm trying to get into tools that you can use to raise your ceiling. For example, we recently talked about, I mean, Jeff Nippard's getting hit from every direction. In my last video on him, I bet him that I could, improve his trapezius genetics by the use of specialized exercises that are D tier in his opinion. I stand by that. I think I can help people raise the ceiling for their trap development, for example, beyond what you normally would get from a basic bodybuilding routine that you'd see on one of these big channels, right? Same thing for a lot of other areas that I have, exercises that I'm trying to put out there. These are, I mean, it's not it's not like some kind of like Mongolian like herb or something that you just take and you grow, but I mean, it definitely will help you develop more. Just, just like the preacher curl can be that for somebody's bicep. Well, power shrug might be that for your traps. For the many bodybuilders watching these big channels who almost completely neglect the spinal erectors. Well, I mean, you guys know I have some, I mean, they're not secrets. You have to do a lot of work to make it happen, but you can definitely, revolutionize your development in those areas with some of these exercises. So, yeah, I am pushing, techniques that can raise your ceiling, right? And there are the idea that there's no secrets and no shortcuts. That's not true either. I mean, everyone's out there trying to sell you the shortcut, sell you the secret, but that doesn't mean there isn't such a thing. Like, for example, for me, we talked about decline bench earlier. That was actually the secret, quote unquote, that got me benching 315. Right? I stalled out in the mid to upper 200s on bench press, and I just couldn't progress past that. Now I wasn't doing, smart powerlifting training or anything, but whatever. I hit a plateau. Then I just, switched to decline. In a couple months, I get my decline to the mid threes, and then bring it back, and boom, I'm hitting 315 on bench. I mean, it's kind of a secret, right? I mean, I still had to do work, but it was getting away from just doing the basics, and it helped me get to where I was trying to go, right? So that sort of thing is real. It's just right. It's not probably going to be found in studies, and it's probably not going to be easier. It's going to require you to do more, probably not less. But you get shortcuts too, like right, like fasting, right? If I can lose the same amount of fat that I would have to lose in like 7 weeks in 1 week of fasting, I mean, it's short, it's a cut, right? I mean, it's not easy. It's not like it's not effortless. You don't eat some, Mongolian herb and you just shed body weight effortlessly, but it's a shortcut, right? It works. So, there is some of that. And that's kind of what I'm more trying to bring attention to. I think I'm doing the real thing that a lot of these, people are trying to tell you they're doing. But anyway, that's that. Yeah. I think there's room in the world. Obviously most channels should probably be trying to raise, the floor for, the masses, but I do think there ought to be some devoted to, kind of those esoteric techniques that can actually genuinely help you to raise your ceiling of potential. Now, I mentioned Jeffrey Nippert there for a second. My little wager with him still stands, friendly wager, but I want to emphasize that it's friendly. I saw him doing a collab with Jim Rat in Gaza, who you guys should definitely follow him on Instagram. Very inspirational guy. Anyway, that means Jeff Nippert's on the right. There we have issues with his science communication. I don't like the way he just throws around genetics like a modern day phlogiston or like what quantum physics and science fiction. It's just this thing I can just say whenever I want to explain everything. But that's not as important as some of the bigger issues. So he's a good dude where it counts. So I do want to extend a little olive branch, even though frankly I mean he's totally gaslighting his followers on this on these these Zoomer kids, but whatever. It's not who's natural and who's not isn't the most important thing in the world. All right, guys, this was a little bit of a free form video. I just did not have time to write out a script, but I will try to edit in some like the footage that I talked about and make it good. So if you guys like this and want to see more of it, please, let the algorithm know that. All right, thank you guys.